What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another installment of the Best Armies in 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through the undefeated lists from the previous weekend, and this is going to be a huge one because we had one of the most populous weekends of the year in terms of events, including several super major and major level events like the US Open Dallas and the Storm of Silence GT. So, without further ado, let's dive in and talk about some results. Orks absolutely destroying the game this week with a significant number of event wins at the Storm of Silence GT, the Barn Found GT, Great Game Gongai GT, Collector's Market, Ammonite Gaming GT, and MNM Kivat. That one with a 4-0-1 record, one draw on their record. Huge weekend for Orks. They're really showing the power of their new codex, but we also saw Space Marines coming back in with some really interesting results. Black Templars taking down the Icebreaker GT. Blood Angels with another undefeated result at the Great Game Gongai. Space Wolves, interestingly, in a Champions of Russ detachment, not Stormlance this time around, as well as Ultramarines at the Storm of Silence. We then saw some other races coming out of the woodwork. Drukhari at the Capital Clash. Ridvan Martinez, aka Skari from Skardcast, going undefeated at that one. Aeldari taking down the Wulshel Hassan GT, as well as Astra Militarum at Partisan Games. We then saw some Chaos Space Marine factions doing pretty well. Death Guard at the Icebreaker GT. World Eaters taking down the Alberta Classic. Thousand Suns taking down the Gigabytes May GT, as well as, last but certainly not least, some of the Tyranid factions taking down events. On top of that, Genestealer Cults with Out of the Furnace 5, and most importantly, Tyranids knocking out the biggest event of the weekend, going undefeated at the US Open Dallas. And with that, we are going to dive into these lists, starting with the biggest and greenest faction of the weekend, Orks. First off, talking about Lucas Troller's results from the Great Game Gongai GT. Lucas Troller was running a green tide, running 2 Pain Boys, 3 War Bosses, as well as a Mega Armored War Boss with Raucous Warcaller to count his unit as 10 models, and 2 Weird Boys. We then had those guys supporting a total of 110 boys, 5 units of 20, as well as 1 unit of 10. Those guys get huge benefits from the attached characters. Obviously, the War Boss is giving those one a hit, the Pain Boys giving them a Feel No Pain, and the Weird Boys giving them the ability to teleport. As long as you don't have multiple Weird Bosses attached, you can dump 2 of those characters into a boy squad to combine their bonuses, and especially with their stratagem to gain a commensurate bonus with the round number on a charge roll. The Weird Boys can teleport those boy squads around the table, give them extremely good charges out of their repositional deep strike effect, and get them up the table. We had 1 truck for the unit of 10 boys, as well as a battle wagon, which could embark the 5 Mega Knobs attaching onto the Mega Armored War Boss. We then had some Gretchen and some Storm Boys to act as utility, and that was the list. Moving on to Space Marine factions, we saw Ben Sherwin go undefeated at the Icebreaker GT with an interestingly Firestorm Assault Force variety of Black Templars. Ben was running a High Marshal Helbrecht, as well as a Judiciary with Champion of Humanity, a Lieutenant, and the Emperor's Champion. We then had 4 units of Crusader squads, those guys attaching Meltaguns and Multi-Meltas, alongside a single newly discounted Intercessor squad. We had 2 Rhinos to house those Crusader squads. They can fire their Multi-Meltas out of the firing deck of the Rhinos, gaining assault on all of their weapons. Also allows those Rhinos to advance and shoot. Well, exciting. We then had 2 Black Templars Impulsors, which could embark 2 of the 3 units of 5 Primaris Sword Brethren into them. A 3-man Inceptor squad in order to add a little bit of utility, alongside a Land Raider Redeemer and a Scout squad for scoring. Moving on to Blood Angels, we saw some success from the Sons of Sanguinius at the Great Game Gongai GT. Max Schwartzer went undefeated with the faction, taking a relatively standard variety of Blood Angels, this one taking a Death Company Dreadnought, however. The list was including 2 captains, as well as a chaplain with Artisan of War, Lamarties, as well as the Sanguinor, 2 Assault Intercessor squads for those captains to jump into, get the benefit of those wound rerolls on their devastating wound weapons, 2 Impulsors for them to hop into, as well as a Rhino, embarking 10 Death Company Marines, a 2nd Death Company Jump Pack squad for Lamarties to join, a Jump Pack Assault Intercessor squad for utility, as well as a bunch of Eradicators. A big 6-man Eradicator squad to add some ranged anti-tank shooting, plus some utility from an infiltrator squad as well as a scout squad. Death Company Dreadnought is included in there. Pretty interesting inclusion. 2 heavy flamers on that guy, which gives him incredible utility. Not only can he be punching in response to enemy targeting in melee, but also you can use him in the shooting phase to be heavy flamering basically anything within 12 inches. Being able to reactively fire those heavy flamers gives you a good profile into a wide variety of targets, and given the fact that the attacks are essentially free, even if you're just being shot at, they allow you to clear out infantry that are nearby the Dreadnought, even if you're being attacked by heavy ranged weapons. The Death Company Dreadnought's definitely an interesting inclusion. It is a little bit slow, especially compared to the jump pack units on the table, but it does provide a bit of a fast and hard-hitting anchor to the list that Blood Angels don't normally have. That moves us on to basically the spiciest list of the weekend, and this is going to be a tough video to title because I don't know which I'm more excited about. Whether we saw Tyranids winning one of the biggest events of the weekend, we see some success from Genestealer Cults, but we also see success from champions of Russ, Ryan Smith, taking them to the Storm of Silence GT and going undefeated with the Space Wolves Bespoke Detachment. Now, for those who don't know, Champions of Russ allows the army to select a saga at the end of each turn. They can gain some special benefits until the end of the battle. These include sustained hits if your characters kill any enemy characters, increased objective control if your characters control your opponent's home objective, a 6+ feel no pain across the army if any of your characters are reduced below half starting strength but not destroyed, and potentially lethal hits if any of your characters destroy enemy monsters or vehicles. To that end, Ryan has taken some pretty tanky characters in his army and is especially trying to basically ape a Stormlance style of list, but using this Champions of Russ detachment. This includes Herald Deathwolf alongside Logan Grimnar on Stormrider, 3 Thunderwolf battle leaders, one of them with the Black Death to give him anti-monster and anti-vehicle, alongside a Wolf Lord on Thunderwolf. We then had a Phobos Lieutenant alongside 3 units of Fenrisian Wolves to act as utility, 3 units of Thunderwolf Cavalry, a Whirlwind to add some indirect fire support, and 3 units of 10 Wolfen. Very Stormlance task force style of army. You can still potentially advance and charge if you use it with the stratagem Relentless Assault if you have completed Saga of the Warrior Board, and that's the case for most of the Champions of Rest stratagems. For example, Go for the Throat gives you +1 AP, as well as Lance if you've completed Saga of the Beast Slayer. So if any of these characters are able to unlock those sagas, you can get enhanced versions of stratagems that are available for other Space Marine detachments, like Stormlance or Gladius Task Force. But obviously you have to jump through in order to be able to do so. However, with the number and speed of characters in these Thunderwolf units, this army can be crossing the table incredibly fast and have incredible opportunities to unlock them. Now, last but certainly not least, in terms of our Space Marine finishers this weekend, we also saw Khosra Hoshadar go undefeated with Ultramarines, a Vanguard Spearhead at the Storm of Silence GT. This is a classic variety of an Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead that we've seen do fairly well, basically since last year. Khosra was running an Apothecary Biologus with Blade Driven Deep to give a large Eradicator squad, and potentially Marnius Calgar a forward deploy. Uriel Ventress to give a unit, Centurion Devastator squad, most likely Deep Strike to allow them to come out of Strategic Reserve and drop on the table. A Company Hero squad for Uriel Ventress to jump into. That's 6 Eradicators that I mentioned before, plus 2 units of smaller Eradicators to come out of Strategic Reserve. 2 big Inceptor squads that can use the uppy downy stratagem in Vanguard Spearhead, or just come in out of Deep Strike to use their Meteoric Descent to get close to enemies, act as utility units, and blast people away with massive numbers of Plasma Exterminator shots. 3 Scout squads and an Infiltrator squad for utility. We talked at length about the style of list, so not too much else to say here, but it is nice to see the Vanguard Spearhead back on the top tables and doing well. Moving on to Drukhari, Ridvan Martinez, Skari from Scarredcast, went undefeated with the army, 4-0-1 record at the Capital Clash GT. This did use a differential scoring system, so ties are a little bit more common in that style of scoring. Skari was running 2 Archons, as well as a Beastmaster and Lilith Hesperax. We had 2 units of Capelite Warriors alongside a Court of the Archon that could attach alongside an Archon into one of those Capelite Warrior squads. We then had a Raider, 3 Venoms, a Chronos, 5 Incubi, 2 units of 5 Mandrakes, 2 units of 5 Scourges, one of them with all Dark Lances, one of them with Haywire Blasters, and, interestingly, 2 Void Raven Bombers. The Void Ravens were equipped with Dark Scythes, giving them a total of 12 Strength 8 AP4 2 damage gunshots, which combined with their Strength 9 AP2 3 damage Void Raven implosion missiles can give them a lot of anti-medium infantry firepower. These guys are incredibly good at knocking out big bricks of things like opposing Space Marines. They also get their once per battle bombing run, where they can drop a bomb on an enemy model and have the potential to deal D6 mortal wounds to each enemy within a D6 inch radius of that enemy model. That gives the army a lot of additional shooting that isn't necessarily contingent on the transports that Sky Splinter Assault normally relies on. That gives the army a lot of reach that they wouldn't normally have. Moving on to Aeldari Classic, we also saw Thomas Woback go undefeated with a battle host. This at the Wuschelhassen GT. Thomas was running an Autarch Wayleaper with the Phoenix Gem, a Troop Master with the Weeping Stones, Yvrain alongside 10 Storm Guardians, a Wave Serpent, 3 units of 5 Dark Reapers, a single Falcon and 5 Shadow Specters, and a bunch of bikes, 2 units of 2 Skyweavers, as well as a Shroud Runner unit, 1 unit of Striking Scorpions, 2 Swooping Hawks, 2 Warp Spiders to act as utility, and then following that up with 2 Harlequin troops, 1 of 10 and 1 of 5 for the Troop Master to join into. Now, we did see Yvrain in the list, although this was not a Ynnari list. It was not using Yvrain as the Warlord to gain access to Drukhari models. She was simply in there in order to buff the Harlequin troops. It is interesting to see Harlequin troops included as an offensive option. They are fairly dangerous melee counterpunch, although they lack the speed of some of the other Eldar options. Once they are disembarking transports and getting up the table, they can add a lot of aggressive melee that classic battle host varieties don't typically have access to. Now moving on to Astra Militarum. Michael Costello went undefeated with the faction at the Partisan Games GT. This is a relatively heavily armored variety of Astra Militarum. We had a Acadian Command Squad alongside Lord Solar Leontis, Ursula Creed, Iron Hand Strachan, and a tank commander. Now we also had a regimental attaché unit to jump in with that command squad that gives them access to a 12-inch anti-deep strike bubble, as well as all the benefits granted by the other attaché characters. We also had an infantry squad and Acadian shock trooper squad to drop those characters into, a Chimera plus 10 Adelan Rough Riders to act as a little bit of melee counterpunch, a Basilisk to add indirect fire, 1 Khazarkan squad, still seeing these guys on the table despite the recent points increase, but their base profile definitely warrants inclusion, a Leman Russ Exterminator to improve AP, 5 Rattling Snipers, alongside 2 Rogaldor battle tanks, a Scout Sentinel to buff the shooting, and a single Tempestus Scion squad to deep strike in to complete some secondaries. And that moves us on to Death Guard. Matthew Sneed went undefeated with the faction, taking a Biologus Putrefier, a Foul Blightspawn, 2 Malignant Pladecasters alongside Typhus. Typhus is jumping into a big unit of 5 Death Shroud Terminators, and we saw Plague Marines to jump in the Biologus Putrefier and the Foul Blightspawn. A unit of 10 Plague Marines for those 2 characters, plus 2 units of 5 to join with the Malignant Pladecaster. All of those Plague Marines are being ferried to the table by 2 Death Guard Rhinos, and that was backed up by a ton of shooting. 3 Predator Destructors alongside 2 War Dog Brigands coming out of Chaos Knights, plus a Fetid Bloat Drone and some Nurglings to act as utility. Fairly standard stuff that we've seen from Death Guard. They can stack a lot of armor penetration increasing effects between the War Dog Brigands, the Predator Destructors with their baked in plus 1 AP when targeting specific targets, and that can stack with the Contagion for -1 saving throw within contagion range of any of the Death Guard units proper, which can make even those relatively light weapons on the Destructors as well as the chain guns on the Brigands punch through even relatively heavily defended enemies. Moving on deeper into the Chaos factions, Daniel Whitaker took World Eaters to an undefeated result at the Brighton Classic GT number 7. Daniel was running Angron and Lord Invocatus, those guys backing up a ton of 8-bound. 2 units of 6 Exalted 8-bound, 3 units of 3 Standard 8-bound, as well as a unit of 3 Exalted 8-bound following up the rear. We then had some Jackals, 10 Jackals to act as utility, and 1 Mauler Fiend in order to counterpunch some enemy armor. Interestingly, including its Magma Cutters to give it additional ranged attacks rather than its additional extra attack melee weapon. Now, last but not least, in terms of the Chaos Space Marine sub-factions, Thousand Suns also saw an appearance this week. Noah Neuendorfer went undefeated with the faction. This was at the Gigabytes May GT. Noah was running Aramon on a Disc of Zinch, Magnus the Red, the great man himself, plus an Exalted Sorcerer Sorcerer with the Umblerfic Crystal to allow him to teleport, a Disc Exalted Sorcerer with Lord of Forbidden Lore to duplicate Kabbalistic Rituals, an Infernal Master with Arcane Vortex, and a Winged Demon Prince. Those guys were backing up 3 units of Rubric Marines, 2 units of 10, interestingly, all of those with Flamers, plus a unit of 5, alongside 2 units of Zangors. No attachments for them, but we are seeing Zangors played a lot more often these days in order to bring more high OC units to the Thousand Suns roster, plus 3 units of 2 Chaos Spawn to act as utility. And that moves us on to some Xenos factions. We saw Tyranids do fairly well this week, with both Genestealer Cults and Tyranids going undefeated at events. First off, out of the Furnace 5, Andrew Lewis went undefeated with Genestealer Cults. Andrew was running a Clamavis, a Nexus with Inscrutable Cunning to give it forward deploy, and CP regen, plus 3 Primuses and 2 Reductive Saboteurs. Those Primuses could jump into a combination of the 4 units of 10 Acolyte Hybrids, all of those guys equipped with Demolition Charges, and Hand Flamers out the wazoo, or the 3 units of 20 Neophyte Hybrid. We also had a Goliath Truck, a good delivery system for some of those Acolytes, and 2 Achilles Ridge Runners to add their Crossfire benefit for +1 AP to any of those high-volume ranged weapons. Rounding out the end of the video, we also had the largest event of the weekend, the US Open Dallas, taken down by Tyranids. That was an 8-0 record by Samuel Pope, who took an unending swarm variety of Tyranids to the event. Samuel was running a Neurotyrant to buff the Shadow of the Warp ability, a Tervigon in order to regenerate back the Termagants in the army, of which there were 80, 4 units of 20 Termagants. We also get access then to the lethal hits and sustained hits combination that the detachment can grant access to. You can get 5+ critical hits if you have a unit of 20 or more models. The Tervigon grants nearby Termagants lethal hits, giving you potentially lethal and sustained on your twin-linked Spine Fists, which can deal relatively significant damage, especially against lightly armored enemies. The downside there is that Tyranids don't really source too many hit rerolls, although the army is also bringing 3 Exocrines to add some anti-heavy infantry shooting, and also to give rerolls of 1 to whatever targets their original target. We then had a big unit of 20 Gargoyles. These guys can be buffed with additional movement speed by advancing up the table, firing, and then moving again. Once they're destroyed, you can then use this reinforcement stratagem in the detachment to bring them back, deep strike them, and potentially shoot and scoot onto objectives in the late game. And that can also all be initiated by a Winged Hive Tyrant. This guy is relatively fast with a high base movement speed, and he projects the Hive Tyrant aura for free stratagems, which synergizes well with most of these stratagems in detachment. We then had 10 Hormigons to add a little bit more objective control, the 3 Exocrines I mentioned before, and 1 Biovore to score secondaries, a single Lictor and Neurolictor to add a little bit of forward deploy, plus 3 Venom Thropes to give all of those huge bricks of infantry stealth, and 22 Neurogons. They do come in base sets of 11, so the maximum unit is 22. Only OC1 for these guys, but they do give a lot of additional bodies and board control to the Tyranid army for only 90 points, which is an absolute steal. And with that, those are all the best armies in 40k for this week. Super duper crazy week. Enormous results out of Orks. Space Marines still doing well, but seeing some success from especially Champions of Russ and Tyranids is absolutely wild, and you'll love to see it. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about these lists and which one is your favorite. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.